everyone, and welcome to today's session. My name is Lakaisha Lang, and I am NAMIC-Virginia's president. NAMIC-Virginia's mission is to educate, advocate, and empower for multi-ethnicity in the communications industry. NAMIC-Virginia is appreciative of the support of our members, corporate sponsors, volunteers, and partners, some of which are on the call today and on the panel. This year, we've been able to offer up to 4 events per month focused on professional development workshops, wellness sessions, and community-related activities based on your feedback. Thank you to the SCTE and the NCTA for the partnership in this informative discussion about the difference between 5G and 10G. You will also hear the benefits and what this means for bandwidth, speed, range, and uninterrupted connectivity. I will now hand it over to Rob Stoddard, Senior Vice President, Industry and Association Affairs for the NCTA, the Internet and Television Association. He oversees the association's public affairs efforts, member relations, industry events, and other special projects. He is a recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award from the T. Howard Foundation for Support of Diversity, the Friend of NAMIC Award from the National Association for Multi-Ethnicity in Communications, the Touchstones of Leadership Inspire Award from the Washington, D.C. Baltimore chapter of the Women in Cable Telecommunications, WICT, and the President's Award from the Cable Television Public Affairs Association for outstanding contributions to cable industry public affairs. As a fun fact, Rob met his wife at a toga party, and they've been married for 44 years. So when you see him, ask him to share that story. Rob, I hand it over to you.
Lakaisha, thank you so much. And thanks to everybody at the NAMIC-Virginia chapter. It's great to see all of you here today and great to be visiting with so many good friends from across the Commonwealth. I do want to do a special shout out to several people who have been instrumental in helping put together today's program. Special thanks to both Tony Ford and to Kanya Hammond from Cox. And of course, our dear friend, Zanita Henderson of SCTE. Thanks to Z for the support of SCTE for this program, as well as for its sponsorship. Now, if I asked you these questions, what is 5G? What is 10G? What do their names mean? How will they really all keep us better connected? And what are their true benefits for all of us? I wonder if you know the answer. I will tell you that several people on this call today have already confessed to me that they don't know the answers, but we're going to try to get to the bottom of it all through our conversation today. And by the time we're done, a little less than an hour from now, I am hoping that you're as excited as I am about the stunning potential of these great new platforms for connection. We're going to hear momentarily from a blue ribbon panel of great experts, but let me just ask you to try to hang in through the remainder of the hour today, because before we're done, we're going to share with you a great video from our friends at Cablelabs that really speaks to the amazing potential of these platforms. So stay tuned. And now let's meet our panelists. So I'm going to do this in alphabetical order, and I'm in turn going to offer one fun fact about each of them. Going alphabetically by surname is the great Mike Braham, for starters. Mike is Senior Vice President and General Manager of Trapollo. Many of you on the call probably are familiar with Trapollo. Of course, it's owned by Cox Communications. It provides highly personalized, connected health solutions that meets patients where they live. It's a great company, and it's critical in today's environment. Here's a fun fact about Mike, serious fun fact. Mike spent quite some time as a fighter pilot for the U.S. Marines. So Mike, thank you for your service. And let me ask you, Mike, what's the difference between being a fighter pilot and running Trapollo? Compare and contrast for us.
Great question. I would say they're very much similar in that you have to adapt and overcome in an environment that's constantly changing.
Brilliant answer, Mike, and we'll look forward to some more really smart insights in just a few moments from you. Thank you very much. Next up, of course, is someone else whom many of you may know, Abhi Ghosh. Abhi is the Senior Project Manager, Senior Product Manager for Internet Strategy and Innovation, of course, at Cox Communications, working out of headquarters in Atlanta. So guys from Cox, there's a headquarters guy on the phone. Behave yourselves by all means. Abhi oversees a $5 billion residential internet portfolio of 10 million homes. I learned from my research that Abhi's deeply involved in mentoring. Abhi, are you finding that there's more of a need for mentoring, particularly during this pandemic period?
Absolutely, and thanks for the fun fact. So yeah, I think from both an individual perspective, for those who are coming out of school and are maybe getting their first job or in a time of transition, there's never been a more important time to seek wisdom from those who have done it before and seek guidance from those folks who are maybe in those positions that they're aspiring to. And then on the startup side, I mentor for Techstars and a number of other organizations for those startup companies who have a really great idea and have really seen a problem in the world, and they want to solve it with their own perspective and with their own way. A lot of those folks really need a guide to dealing with these unprecedented times. From a big business's point of view, we've never dealt with a pandemic like this before, to be honest, but we've certainly dealt with quite a number of challenges, and so this is just one of those. And so to help with a guiding hand really does go a long way from a mentoring perspective.
Well, Abhi, thank you for that service, and it's good to know we can turn to you for guidance and advice in this area. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
Let's move on alphabetically through our list. I'm so thrilled to introduce to you my dear friend and colleague, Steve Mace. Steve is the Associate Vice President for Systems Technology at NCTA, the Internet and Television Association. And NCTA, of course, advocates on behalf of cable operators, programmers, and suppliers to Congress, the White House, the Federal Communications Commission, and other agencies. Steve also is a U.S. military veteran. Steve, thank you for your service, U.S. Army. And was also reminded in looking at your resume, Steve, that you were fortunate enough to work overseas for a couple of years in Amsterdam, if I'm not mistaken. And I wondered if you, through your experience, found that these technologies and these platforms, are they truly global now, or do they still break down largely along national lines?
Thanks, Rob, for that introduction. I'd say that they're migrating to be truly global, but there still is some internationalization of technologies. I'm not sure we'll ever get away from that just because it's baked in. I hope we do, but I think we're moving in that direction with the new technologies that's coming out today, particularly with 10G and 5G, to be honest.
Well, it'll be fun to talk about that in just a moment. And for anybody on the call, if you want some good travel tips for Amsterdam or the Netherlands, you know who to call now. Steve's your man. And last, and certainly not least, is my good friend, Sarah Vergara. Sarah is Senior Digital Media Strategist for Cablelabs. For those of you not familiar with Cablelabs, it's really a global and research development facility outside of Denver, between Denver and Boulder, founded by U.S. cable companies. So one of the great contributions to the cable world came from the creation of Cablelabs 30 years ago. The fun fact I found out about Sarah is that Sarah once worked for a toy store, Kazoo Toys, if I'm not mistaken. Now, Sarah, how did that experience kind of inform your work at Cablelabs today?
Yeah, so I worked at Kazoo Toys in the e-commerce business, and so the way people shop just changed, right? Everything is changing. So just working in a toy store really helped me with what I'm doing now, with how things change all the time. So, and technology, obviously.
Absolutely. Good training and change management. That's great. Well, Sarah, thank you so much. And I hope you'll all join me in welcoming this tremendous panel. We're going to spend about the next half hour chatting about 5G and 10G, what they mean, what the differences are, what they bring to the table. We'd like this to be open and interactive. If at any point you'd care to jump in with a question or comment, please feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and fire away. Or if you'd like to use the chat function, that would be fine as well. Certainly towards the end of the hour, we'll come back and specifically invite your questions and comments. I'd like to get the conversation rolling really with the fundamentals, the foundational question that we wanted to address today. We hear these terms, Steve Mace, all the time, 5G and 10G. Could you spend just a minute or two helping everybody on this call understand what 5G really is, what 10G is, and by the way, what does that G really stand for?
Sure. Thanks, Rob. Yeah, it is a question we get asked all the time, but I think I can break it down for you pretty quickly and hopefully succinctly. So let me talk about 5G first. 5G is a continuation of pre-existing set of standards going back to 1980. In fact, it was called 1G, imagine that, back in the 80s, and it was delivering analog voice over cellular telephones. So as time went along, we came into 2G. So the G means generation when it comes to 5G. So second generation, the early 90s, we introduced digital voice, which wasn't so great at first, but became quite nice as time went along. We had the first variants of cellular technology with GSM and TDMA and some others. But again, that evolved to the third generation in the early 2000s, 3G, which brought mobile data. So remember back when we could send pictures, but you really couldn't watch videos. That wasn't that long ago, but that was 3G, the early 2000s. So in the mid 2000s, they realized that they did need to come together because these platforms were diverging internationally, as you mentioned, Rob. So an organization was developed called 3GPP, and also another one, 3GPP2, unfortunately, which was for the Americas, I believe. But anyway, those organizations realized that they needed to start merging these various flavors into a more stable technology. So then 4G came along, and that was in, I guess, 2010 or so. And 4G is also called long-term evolution. Now 4G is just the next variation from 3G, but it ushered in the era of mobile broadband. So now you can watch videos easily and do all the things we're doing today, because today we're using 4G at the highest level of cellular technology. So 5G is built. 5G obviously is the next generation, and the goals of 5G are what they refer to as enhanced mobile broadband and the massive Internet of Things. And I think it's Qualcomm that describes that as machines, objects, and devices. So anything you can imagine could talk to anything else. That's when cars talk to other cars and things like that. So use cases are going to be different between 5G and 10G, but let's talk about 10G now. So 10G does mean speed in this regard. 10G means 10 gigabits per second. So that's the goal that we're trying to get to with 10G. But 10G is really a set of, I guess, technology goals for a suite of technologies going to be competitive with 5G, but also have another place in the industry and serve different goals in certain ways. So Cable's 10G initiative, it does mean 10 gigabits per second, sorry about that, over the cable plant, and also enhanced reliability, better security, and I guess maybe primarily is extreme low latency, so which means really quick to respond. So something that goes over the internet between your home or the cable plant or something will be so fast that you can't really tell. And that's going to allow things like multiple streams of 4K and 8K movies, really immersive gaming, maybe holograms, who knows. But we're going to see some of those things later on in the video you talked about. So 10G means speed. It means a set of services or products. And 5G is the fifth generation of mobile technology.
And Steve, just for kind of basis of comparison, so you talked about how fast 10G, 10 gigabit per second is. That's really in comparison to today's state of the art, which generally speaking is 1 gigabit. Is that correct? So we're really looking at basically a 10-fold increase in speeds.
Right. And not many people have 1 gigabit to their home right now. I mean, maybe that's not true, but I think it's true. I certainly wouldn't be able to use it myself if I did have it. But that's correct. But when you think about 4K and 8K movies, maybe something beyond that, light field images being displayed in a room, or video walls in classrooms and things of that nature, those are going to require a lot of bandwidth and very low latency, and security and everything else. Telehealth is another huge area that I'm sure we'll talk about later. But does that answer your question?
It does. And just sticking with the same vein for a moment, when we talk about 5G, I've heard a lot of hype that indicates that the speed of 5G could very much approach what today's state-of-the-art wired cable infrastructure can provide. Is that accurate? Do 5G wireless speeds roughly approximate what we're able to see in the wired environment today?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think they'll exceed 1G. I mean, I'm sure they will. But there's, yeah, 5G is pretty complex. There are 3 frequency bands it uses. The highest is millimeter wave, and there really isn't anything that's being consumed. I don't think there are any consumer devices today that use millimeter wave radar, basically. But that would be something that's real fast, but doesn't penetrate buildings. It'd have to be very densely populated within the area. So that's something that would be important for smart cities, things like that. But also remember, with radio technology, anytime with any radio technology, at least today, the more dense the population is, the more users you have off of a cell, for instance, the less speed they're going to get. So if it's a very populated cell that's maybe at its limit, maybe you're getting 500 megabits per second, and maybe if there are 10 people using it, maybe you're getting 5 gigabits per second. That's not a real example, but it's, tries to get my point across anyway.
So Sarah Vergara, Steve has hinted at this a little bit. I wondered, from your perspective at Cablelabs, we hear so much about the term you often hear is the promise of this new technology, right? Based on what you've seen in the development work at Cablelabs, what can these technologies bring us in the future that we're not necessarily getting today? What do you see as the big applications?
Yeah, so this is why being a part of this connectivity industry is not boring, because of new exciting things. I mean, I don't know what the next technology trend is or invention will be. I do know that broadband will be central to a myriad of new immersive digital experiences and other emerging technologies that will really revolutionize the way we live, work, learn, and play. It will really reinvent the role technology plays in our everyday lives, from remote diagnostics that will help doctors monitor patients from anywhere in real time, to what Steve said, video walls. There's augmented reality that will help our kids learn and collaborate across the globe. So 10G, 5G will really meet these demands of our imaginations. I do have a few favorites. It's story time. Having lived in New York City, I used public transportation. I don't love driving. I could Uber, Lyft, but I'm not the chatty type. So it would be awesome for me to hop on one of these autonomous self-driving taxi cars, call out a destination, get me there safely, hop out and go about my business. And I could get from point A to point B and move on. Obviously, for this autonomous taxi fleet to become a safe mode of mass transportation, the amount of bandwidth for this experience, for these spontaneous rides to happen, it will take massive amounts of data going back and forth through a fast, reliable, low latency and secure network. And that's where the cable industry is getting at, the 10G platform. Another technology I'm excited to see to come to fruition is the holographic display. I never really grasped the current 3D movies where you have cardboard 3D glasses that are awkward. And the 3D holograms is where the future is headed, that will not include these bulky headsets. You have these 3D holographic technologies like light field displays, video panels, holo rooms, light field tables, 3D avatars that will reconnect us to the real world. So these technologies will create photorealistic floating images. It's really about the physical and the digital worlds colliding, and it doesn't suck. And the applications are definitely endless for various industries. And yeah, the 10G platform will help these new innovations really transform consumer experiences in the homes, businesses, and wherever people will connect. It's, the possibilities of smart cities, healthcare, connected gaming, video streaming, education, businesses, and these are just a couple of examples of immersive experiences that the 10G platform will enable in the near future.
Sarah, thank you for that. You can tell you're a marketer. We're going to borrow your words for a new slogan. It won't suck. It's a great way of looking at it. But really, in terms of time, Steve likes that too. In terms of timeline, are these all long-term propositions, or is any of this in the near term, say in the next 3 to 5 years?
There are already self-driving cars. There's AI, there's work in the light field display, there's organizations already forming to make these technologies happen. There are field trials almost for these technologies. So we're thinking, I would say 3 to 8 years. for really it to be adopted and have a mass adoption.
That's great. And here's hoping we're through the pandemic by then so we can take advantage of all of that.
Right.
Abhi, let's bring this a little closer to home. I wanted to visit with you for a minute, starting out really with 5G. Now, I will tell you happily, I live in a Comcast service area, so I see a lot of Comcast advertising on my local television set as I'm watching things during the day and in the evening. And Comcast has been doing quite a bit of promotion and advertising around 5G capabilities for its new wireless service. How is Cox looking at 5G? Do you see it from your perspective as a viable product that might be bundled or somehow packaged with what you guys are doing already?
Yeah, and inherently there's the David and Goliath of what is 5G, what is 10G, and are they complementary or are they combative with one another, right? So, so great question. Thanks for that. So my take on that is that from a wireless perspective, Cox is, amongst many other things, exploring what that might look like. So no announcements or anything, but really looking at, does this make sense in the portfolio of goods that we offer, and does this deliver a compelling value proposition, right? So TBD on that, but research is underway to evaluate that. But what I will say is that for those companies that are entering into the 5G game, it's been a bit of a rough start, but I see nothing but goodness from it, because I wholly believe that it's complementary, right? These kind of big fights over time, the Fords and the GMs, the Microsofts and the Oracles, they result in really meaningful change for the world, for customers, and the use cases and innovation that are driven from them. So I think it's a great news story. 5G and 10G work hand in hand for so many of the examples that my panelists have already shared and that we'll talk more about. But I'll take the one example that's near and dear to my heart. I have a Tesla, and I absolutely love the self-driving capabilities of it, right? And that doesn't really work as well as it could and at scale until we have really strong connections on the road, as well as that solid connection to take off all of those gigs and soon to be probably terabytes of data from self-driving experience and take those learnings and process them from a wireline connection. So they're absolutely hand in hand, and the compelling experience, that use case, is really fueled by having both of them, not one achieving the point of singular benefit. So I'm excited about the future with having both of those and having both of those at scale.
That's great. And Abhi, what I hear frequently, of course, NCTA has been a little bit out front, maybe even over our skis to some extent, talking about the onset of 10G, the deployment of 10G. We frequently get questions about how soon that will happen, how hard the companies will have to work in order to be able to deploy 10G service. Could you give us Cox's take on that? How heavy of a lift will it be to move to a 10G infrastructure, and what's your guesstimate in terms of timetable?
Sure, yeah. So the interesting thing is that you can prove anything in a lab, right? So a vaccine in a lab doesn't do any good until it gets out, right? So that's a little bit about where 10G is. So it's an experiment at this point, and it's a really exciting experiment to be able to deliver these services over some of the existing cabling that we already have to get to market very quickly and economically efficiently. So it's starting, but it really doesn't make a broad impact until we have the ability to manifest that across thousands and thousands, and in our case, millions of homes. And so Cox's philosophy really has been on not singling out some neighborhoods that are the haves and have-nots, like many other companies are. So we really do care about having that equal access for as much of our footprint as possible. And so you'll see that we'll start to experiment with it in market trials, but we really want to have this as a technology that can scale, and to get to that scale requires more than just us, right? More than any one single company. It requires a partnership in this consortium sort of environment. So, for example, we can deliver 1 gig today. We deliver it to just about 100% of the footprint, 99.9 for legal disclaimer reasons, but basically anyone in our Cox footprint can get, right? But what does that mean? If you have an old compact Presario computer, doesn't mean much, right? If you have an 802.11b router, doesn't mean much. If you don't have the use cases that really can benefit from it, doesn't mean much, right? If you don't have many, many devices within the home, Internet of Things, powerful 4K, 8K streaming devices, gaming, etc., all happening at the same time, doesn't mean much. So there's a confluence of factors that really come into play in advancing where the industry is from a device capability and from an ecosystem that can really enjoy and deliver benefit, and then the consumer adoption of it, which Sarah mentioned. And that really has to happen hand in hand. And so that's why you see these things as being evolutionary in nature, and not just like one day you wake up and we're all at 10G. There's everything from the laptop that you're on or the phone that you're on has to be upgraded, right? The new iPhone cycle seems to be coming out this year with 5G, and so that'll be a great boon for the wireless providers who can now have some sort of critical mass onto which to deploy these things. And then that means that there will be developers, there'll be software coders, there'll be hardware specialists who can marry all of these things together in really meaningful user experiences that make life better, that make life more fun, or that make life just a little bit easier. So a lot of things have to happen, and a lot of things are happening for exactly that reason, to make sure that we advance this into the future.
You know, that is such great perspective and so important for all of us to remember. My only observation is if anybody can pull off 10G, it's likely to be Cox. You mentioned that you have and offer 1 gig systems today. I know that you've been a leader in deploying 1 gig over the last 5 or 6 years. So taking that to the next level, I'm sure will be a huge challenge for everyone. Let's turn to our friend Mike Braham now. Mike, first of all compliments to you. You know, on behalf of our entire industry, you and Trapollo have become, and I don't say this in the pejorative sense, but kind of the poster children for telehealth, for the capabilities of these high-speed, high-capacity systems, which you are able to leverage to help bring healthcare right into the homes of so many of us. As you look at the possibilities and the potential of these platforms, and perhaps 5G resonates with you a little bit more now than 10G would, but how will Trapollo leverage this capacity and actually use it to improve and enhance the product that you provide?
Thank you, and thanks for the introduction and the invitation today. You know, it is truly an honor and a blessing to be a part of this industry and to really be part of a team which has been the evangelist for what are the capabilities really that exist across all of the really all of the MSOs, and what has turned out to be this intersection of so many I'll say elements of change. It has been that there's been a tremendous amount of thought put into folks aging in place. There's been a tremendous now look at the just the advent of so many different technologies and kind of how they're being used and or the potential for them. And then as we're really being engaged, you know, most dynamically over the last couple of months to be now immersed as a nation and as a world in COVID, and then also now inside of America, cities often in having the challenges of social unrest, all of the opportunity of seeing how can we leverage really the best of a wireless environment and the best of a wireline environment, specifically broadband, to immediately be able to really have a position of leadership in the changes that are occurring, specifically in healthcare and in telehealth. And in looking at the best of what's the wireless and the best of what's the wireline, it's to be able to deal specifically with both the urban and the rural underserved communities in America to try to bring healthcare directly to their home. As we're seeing, there are so many people that are using really either it's in the urban environments, they're using the local hospital maybe as their primary care sometime. Very inefficient use of those resources in the hospital oftentimes, but it's a requirement, it's a necessity because of the inability to get care other ways. Now in so many of the different aspects, and it's been accelerated because of COVID, is that people needed to stay in their home, and the ability to immediately adapt the technology that would allow for the disparity of care to be delivered, to be able to reach, again, the rural and the urban underserved community, and to really just reduce, if not blow up, every myth as far as people who would or wouldn't be willing to use these technologies I love in the telehealth world right now that it is a both and that what we're able to do at Trapollo, we're serving customers / patients all across the United States. We're not limited to any one geography. And in fact, the hospitals today, oftentimes when we may be providing as an industry, the infrastructure for the hospital itself, for their electronic medical records, that's our big broadband and our big bandwidth capabilities to be used in our industry. The technology going into the homes, specifically Trapollo does use wireless technology, because if that patient can reach a cell tower, we can deliver voice and data and video in a way to have complete care by whether it be a general practitioner or even a specialist. And I don't mind sharing others. I got injured right as COVID started, and as I've shared it with a few of you, I just finished getting surgery about 2 weeks ago. In the workup for my surgery, which is pretty big time surgery, I saw a neurologist, I saw a hematologist, oncologist, I saw a spinal surgeon, and everybody else, all the same way that I'm seeing you guys today. And so what I'm really so, enthusiastic and would ask really all of us to act really as evangelists in our families and in our own communities of and spheres of influence, is that the best of what we have today in the MSO world, but especially as our contribution to lead in a time of telehealth, and in leading through the disparity of care, the collective us on the phone, we have a solution. And we have a position at the table.
And Mike, is it safe to assume that the onset of the pandemic and the fact that so many of us now really are kind of locked down at home, has that been a real jolt to your business, or at least to the needs demonstrated for the service that you provide?
It has been, because right now we have seen that very few people wanted to go to the doctor, quite honestly, because of their concern. And what we found as an industry, the reason this hasn't taken off quicker, maybe as an industry, is that the federal government wasn't reimbursing doctors to be able, to see essentially patients video at the same, payment rate as they would if someone came to their office. So the mother being the necessity here of change, it was to say that they were not going to get paid unless they saw patients via a video. And with that inspiration, what we thought was going to take another 5 years in regulatory and in technological and other kind of change, which is slow moving, we literally saw in the first 5 weeks of COVID, so that by the middle of April, my entire world changed.
That's great. Well, that certainly comports with what we're seeing across the rest of the industry now, with all of our plans being accelerated over the course of the last few months. Mike, thank you for that. I was touched that Catherine Falk mentioned in chat that Trapollo is the gold standard, and there's no question about that. It surely is, and congratulations on your leadership. I want to let everybody know that we're going to open the floor for your comments and questions in just a moment, but I have been tracking some of the comments on chat so far, and several of you have referenced a question that's been on my mind for some time. Of course, it's important to remember that we're doing this discussion in the context of NAMIC and the great work that NAMIC does to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in our business. And boy, during this pandemic particularly, and during the recent discussion about social equity and social justice and racial equity, the whole issue about access to these products and services is really driven to the top of the heap. I did want to invite our panelists to speculate a little bit as you look at these next generation technologies. From your perspective, perhaps Abhi, we might start with you. What opportunities do these technologies provide, particularly to underserved communities, to people of color, to women, to those who are perhaps lower on the socioeconomic scale? Is this a good news story, or does it run the risk of going the other way and increasing the divide among us? What's your thought?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Rob. So from an access perspective, more access is what's needed, right? We have underserved communities with a variety of lenses, whether they be economic, whether they be geographic, whether they be racial in nature, and none of those are okay, right? And so we as an industry, and frankly, we as individuals, right? Like I have my Cox hat that I wear, but also I'm a human being who really wishes for my work to matter to people, to make a difference in this world, right? And so the way that I laid out the strategy for Gig and was able to execute was that we want gig everywhere, right? That wasn't how do we get it done and how do we forget some neighborhoods. That was no, this is our North Star and this is what we're doing. So I think it really is whatever we're willing to evangelize for is what happens, right? To a large extent. And so from an underserved communities perspective, I think there's really two benefits that you see. So one is connectivity. So baseline, that's this idea of learning from home, working from home. Some communities can, some communities can't. This has really exposed the digital divide, especially considering that there are some communities where the kids don't have computers at all. So this idea of like, we can just hop on a Zoom call and have our classes, that's a pipe dream for some, right? And so Cox has done quite a lot in terms of giving subsidized computers and free computers, free internet access. Like we're trying to do as much as we can to make this meaningful for as many of our community members as possible. So that's one. And then two, I'd really look from a long-term perspective. And I spoke at a conference, I think it was a year or so ago in Virginia, really with the lens of community leaders, with educators, and with major employers in the Virginia region to understand, like, what do we do with all of this that's coming in the pipeline, right? Like we read books, we read articles, and we see so much innovation being talked about and so many cool things that seem like sci-fi or seem like, well, San Francisco's got it, right? But how can other regions really play their part? And so I'd say from a Virginia and an underserved community perspective, right? Like we all have to understand what can we do to capitalize on these opportunities that are coming, right? They're coming like a Mack truck. And it's really up to us to understand that we can play a role in it. So first is that you have to recognize that we can all play a role. So whether it's a person of color, whether it's a woman leader, what have you, we can all play a part. And it's about figuring out where our skill set has an intersection with what's necessary. And so, for example, in the jobs perspective of what's going to be enabled, so edge computing is something that's really fueled by 5G, right? So edge computing, just a quick definition, that's when instead of having things happen back at home on the server, so for a company on their home server at HQ, rather you can have things processed elsewhere because you have access to compute power and access to connectivity. So for example, in the years of past, if you wanted to get the answer to your question, I'd have to go to, let's say, like the Google server in California to get it, right? It's wholly inefficient for those folks who might be in a different state or different country. And so with distributed data centers, and data centers are big, clunky things that exist throughout the world, but rather than having those, you can actually have at the edge of the network, you can have compute power to power things like games, to power things like what Mike's working on with Trapollo, healthcare. And you can distribute that in such a wide way so that you don't have to go back to a home server or go back to a data center. You can be very, very close to where you are. And that fundamentally changes the latency game. And that opens up, especially for healthcare, there's so many other applications, but especially for healthcare where latency matters so much. Right? Like the idea of remote surgery or things like that, you can't have lag, right? Like that doesn't work. Like if I lag for a second right now, it's probably okay. But when that scalpel's moving, you gotta get that to hit just right. So I'd say that's the real opportunity, is to look at this connectivity as a great boon, right? So that's, first of all, we have to look at it as what it is. But then two is, what does that mean for us in terms of jobs, and how do we get set up for playing a really meaningful role in that? So whether it's getting into coding, whether it's getting into edge computing, whether it's getting into the low latency game, whether it's getting into autonomous driving, whether it's getting into telehealth, those are the things that are happening. And I think that is more democratized in nature than many other things before it. And to be able to get educated on that and to be able to deliver value will be the way that we all get value in return, whatever our background.
Abhi, you're reinvigorating my excitement in the future of this business. Thank you. Sarah, you were talking earlier about the many applications that will ride on these platforms. Do you think that they too hold great opportunities for underserved communities?
Absolutely. I know that the broadband will offer underserved communities new avenues of resourcing through technologies such as distance virtual reality, possibly, that bring people together across the globe, thus giving people greater opportunities to connect with others who aren't in their current social circles, with, the ability to collaborate and grow with them. And, I'm also thinking about rural communities will have better access to the information as the rest of the world, which will foster some level setting.
That's great. Thank you. Steve, let me turn to you for a second as well. Abhi talked a little bit about jobs opportunities. You're very close to the front line of the technology side of the business. Is the build out of these platforms generating more jobs for us as an industry?
Oh, it certainly will. I mean, when you think about what Abhi was mentioning with the mass connectivity that's needed to make these things work, and that's absolutely true. And he stole my thunder with edge computing, but I was thinking about, maybe this doesn't answer your question, but the requirement to have these devices on, this edge computing basically everywhere if you're going to have autonomous vehicles, because vehicle-to-vehicle communication can't happen in the cloud. It's got to happen, on the street corner basically, because it has to be instantaneous and it has to be instant, just like the scalpel. So as that proliferates, as I expect it will, that I think is going to mean that neighborhoods potentially that aren't served today will have some of these devices going down the streets, I'm hoping, and maybe that'll be another way to connect neighborhoods and reach underserved communities. I don't know, but you got me thinking about that when it comes to deploying vehicles like that and what the requirements going to be to make those things work, and the computing power that's going to be there is also going to be able to be repurposed for other things, like what's just mentioned.
Absolutely. And Mike, coming back to you for a second, affordability on these services always is a big issue as well. And you mentioned this briefly when you were talking a couple of minutes ago, but to what extent do the kinds of services that Trapollo provide have an impact on affordability? Is it really a benefit to those who are underserved or perhaps aren't earning as much of a wage as they might? Is this a good thing for the affordability factor in healthcare?
I think right now what we're looking at are kind of the influence of all of these different things happening at the same time has forced some of us to figure out what could we do to make it more affordable, so that access isn't the only issue which we can deal with, which we can, but it's also from an affordability as what we're calling bring your own device. And this phone, for those that have known me for a decade or longer, know that I've been kind of the evangelist for this for a long time. If you have access to a cell phone and the ability and understanding how to download an app, essentially you can receive telehealth today. You can receive telehealth even just by the way we're doing it right now through Skype on your cell phone. You could do it through FaceTime. There's a number of different ways that really don't have a cost per se in the ubiquitous almostness of everyone having at least a cell phone. For certain populations, especially for younger, that's more prevalent. My world, quite honestly, and the one that I get concerned with, and from a sense of passion and purpose and a right now requirement to get her done, is that seniors are oftentimes, especially in some of the minority populations right now, have a higher prevalence of some of the extra illnesses, the chronic illnesses, which make things like COVID even more deadly. And this is one of the concerns which we're having, is that we've got to worry about cost, but it still is the availability and the comfort that how can we get other devices, how can we get the ability to serve and to have access for folks that are maybe not as comfortable with technology, but maybe have the, they may have the resources or not, but if they can't use this tool. So we're really finding ways that right now we're trying to deal with the total person. It's the physical health, it's the behavioral health, it's really the spiritual health. And what we're seeing right now are so many people that are perishing almost from loneliness on one side when they're isolated, but also if they can't have access to the care, especially for those that have these compromised conditions like congestive heart failure and COPD and diabetes, which are disproportionately affecting some populations here. That's the urgency where I really want to bring to bear all of the things that are possible today, so that we can solve today's problems today and don't even have to wait for some of these other technologies.
That's a great objective, Mike. Thank you. I want to pause for just a moment. We're approaching the conclusion of our time, and of course, we want to sneak in that video that we told you about. But it's been pretty quiet among our audience, spread out on my laptop screen here. I want to pause to see if anybody who is participating today has any questions or comments that they'd like to make, or any questions for our panelists. Feel free to unmute and just speak right up.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks, Rob. So I would like to know, kind of regarding, I guess, again, regarding the job market and what type of jobs will transpire due to 5G and going to 10G on your end that you feel would be needed.
Thank you for that question, Jackie. Abhi, perhaps if we could, we'll come back to you since you're a high-ranking executive at Cox Communications. What can we expect in terms of new jobs growing out of these platforms? And don't forget to unmute yourself as well.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a great question. I think about jobs a lot, right? Because that's the way that we multiply our impact. So delivering one thing to one person is great, but delivering one thing and that's spurring out 9 jobs related to the deployment of a data center that's needed to support it, related to the code base that's needed to enhance the user experience. All of those deeply technical jobs, I think, are on the growth side, right? Like if you look on LinkedIn, that's what you're seeing. You're seeing so much attention to the development sector. So if that's where you're inclined, never been a better time to be in that game, right? I'll also say that designing really thoughtful customer experiences, that's major. That's a major key to this working, right? So what I mentioned with the idea of an autonomous car, right? Like you have to have the at-home connectivity, you have to have the on-the-go connectivity. And without the ability to thoughtfully integrate those two, and if there's a break in the customer experience in the user journey, that doesn't work, right? If I have to manually put in things every time, or if I have other catastrophic failures by virtue of not having connectivity at all, so I can't do elegant handoffs or elegant failovers, this is not going to work. So I think designing those thoughtful experiences, and that can be non-technical, by the way. That can be really looking into the human psychology of how things work, how things look, and how things are designed to be interacted with. So that's another. I'll also venture on this note of virtual reality. That's a hugely interesting thing from a neurological perspective. We've done some research on understanding latency in the lens of that. And so if you have a VR headset, or if you have, as Sarah was mentioning, if you have things like holodeck or HoloLenses, there's only a certain amount of latency or lag, if you will, that our human brain can tolerate. And it's made much worse if there's a jitter within that experience. So you can actually get nauseous. So some people have had that experience. So things like understanding our physiological and psychological interpretations of these new technologies, that I think is another, it's a new paradigm almost from what exists today in its nascent stage. So that'd be second. And then I think in terms of the proliferation of devices and the opportunities to implement things like sensors. So for example, we have these use cases like earthquake sensors that are deployed, right? We have things like hurricane sensors and all these things for weather-related events. We have fire and flood and all those sorts of sensors that exist. But being able to design the next generation of sensors, because I think we're really limited today by our own imagination, because we've been mired by these connectivity challenges that we've had, which is A, that it's either expensive, B, that it's not available in remote areas at any sort of economies of scale that make sense, or C, that the design of this ecosystem just can't work because it's not integrated. It could be one sensor in isolation, but you can't get that information and do any sort of real processing to make a meaningful advancement from there. So I think thinking about the design and those types of sensors, and then again, they relate to the other two things, that you have to design a thoughtful user experience to make that meaningful, and then you have to have this platform of connectedness that powers all of it. So there are a lot of opportunities, and I think that there's never been a better time to be creative in thinking about the future rather than thinking about what exists today, because jobs are changing very quickly. So rather than getting hung up on like, should I learn Python? Should I learn, like, that's not the thing. It's the ability to, if you're a technical person, learn to code, right? Like fundamentally learn to code. And if you're a user experience designer, don't think about this one connected car application. Think about human psychology and how to really capitalize on the things that we love and we need.
I so wish we had more time, because this discussion is really starting to get interesting. Regrettably, we're running out. We do want to spend a few minutes to share with you a great video, as I mentioned, from Cablelabs. But before we do that, special thanks to our panelists and our participants today. Thank all of you for being here, and a really great job in trying to tackle this issue. Lakaisha, perhaps we can come back and do a part 2 somewhere down the line, because this is really incredible stuff. But without further ado, I'd like to hand back off to Sarah, who's going to talk a little bit about the video that she and Lakaisha will share with us now.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, so as Rob mentioned, you will be watching one of 4 installations of the Cablelabs Vision films entitled The Near Future, A Better Place, and it's focused on the future of healthcare, aging in place, and we hope these short films will, inspire you to invent technologies, and keeping in mind that 5G and 10G platforms will and can support these inventions in the near future. And I hope you enjoy the video.
I don't know how you're supposed to feel at 86, but I don't think I feel like I'm 86.
Surprise!
People make my world go round. I fear isolation and being cut off. If I am alone somewhere and I had no one to talk to, no one to share anything with, I bet you I would just dry up and blow away. I call this my smart house. We got sensors in all the rooms. I swallow them. I wear them. Doc knows what's going on with me. I don't have to go to the clinic anymore. I call him up. He's not back in the horse and buggy days.
Looks like you had a pretty active week, huh?
I'm feeling it too. Hey guys, how do you like your ride? Knowing I got eyes on me gives me the confidence to keep me being who I am, doing what I want to do. Frees me up. It was a takes the worry away. I don't have to worry about Paige, my daughter.
Hey, Dad.
Hey, kiddo, what's up?
I'm just checking in.
Because I know she's not worried about me.
No, I'm...
She's always busy, work and kids, but she can see exactly how I'm doing.
I love you, Dad.
That she knows how I feel before I do. Cookie has become my buddy.
Time for your pill, Jim.
My wingman. Hey, Cookie, what time is that car going to be here?
2 minutes. It's cold out. Might want to bring a coat.
It's like he has a brain. Now, what are you doing, Cookie?
It's a quick...
I have come to rely on him. I know I can trust him, and he's got my back. I lost Ellen, my wife, 10 years ago. So many good times, so many memories. Losing her was really tough. If we had had for her then what we have for me now, she would have been in a much better place. I miss her so much. Here, not too long ago, I was experiencing those dizzy spells. The doctor had provided a scan for me at home, so I didn't have to go out to the clinic or anything.
They have those scans for that patient. Take a look.
And that scan revealed that I had an aneurysm. I saw this specialist, a surgeon, and she explained to me we wouldn't have a messy operation. They inject these nanobots and they go into your system.
Basically, we're going to send in an army of nanobots at the aneurysm.
And they find where the aneurysm is and
fixing it.
They seal it off. I get a kick out of thinking that I have a whole bunch of nanobots swimming around up here in my brain, doing what they're supposed to do. I wasn't in a hospital. I was back home.
Oh dear.
I was back home where I want to be, where I belong. The help that I have allows me to stay here in my home. Who is that? Do you remember? The guy in the back.
Who is that?
Have my friends here.
That's Pete.
My family. And I don't want to give that up. I don't want to be in a nursing home. The quickest way to lose your independence is to go where you don't have any independence. That's the truth.
a great video. So to wrap things up, thank you to our amazing facilitator, Rob Stoddard, thank you, as well as our fantastic panelists, Steve Mace, Abhi Ghosh, Mike Braham, and Sarah Vergara for providing this engaging and informative webinar. So I want to thank our NAMIC Virginia members and all attendees for joining us this afternoon. Please join us for our Winning with Wellness series Meditation Monday on August 17th from 12 to 12:30, and part 3 of our Make Money Move series, 6 Steps to Financial Independence with Eileen Anona on August 19th from 12 to 1. Finally, to find out more information about the industry award-winning NAMIC Virginia chapter, please visit our website at namicvirginia.com and follow the chapter on social media. NAMIC Virginia is on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube as well. And we hope to see you at future NAMIC Virginia events. Have a great afternoon and enjoy the rest of the day.